Welcome to a deep dive that might just kind of turn your understanding of power and freedom upside down. Today we're exploring the work of Peter Duke. He's a researcher. He's gone deep into global power structures and hidden symbolism, and frankly, how information is used to control us. And get this, we're going to use Elon Musk as our unexpected entry point.
This is the Lenny and Maria Deep Dive podcast show at the website notebooklmpodcasts.com. AI chat review of Tefestina can be found at notebooklmchats.com.
I'm Lenny, your guide through this fascinating and at times unnerving world.
And I'm Maria, here to kind of help us dissect Duke's insights. He's had firsthand interactions with people like Rupert Murdoch, Bill Gates, and yes, even Elon Musk. So he's not just theorizing, he's seen how the sausage gets made, so to speak.
Yeah, he's been in the room.
He's been there. And what he's pointing to is this recurring symbol. It's the Phrygian cap. It's been used throughout history. You've probably seen it. It's often associated with liberty. But Duke argues it's actually a symbol of controlled freedom. The kind granted by those in power, not true inherent rights. It's like a dog on a leash being told it's free to roam. And what's even more unsettling is that this symbol, it pops up in some really surprising places, from ancient Rome to modern-day emblems used by the U.S. Senate, even El Salvador.
Okay, so where do we even begin to unpack all of this?
Well, Duke starts by calling Elon Musk, get this, a modern-day doge. He makes a comparison to the Doge of Venice, who held a symbolic position within a powerful oligarchy.
Okay. On the surface, that sounds pretty out there. Elon Musk, the Doge. But Duke doesn't stop there. He points to Musk's push for a Department of Government Efficiency, and he links it back to a proposal from the early 20th century for a Secretary of General Affairs, which was basically an attempt to consolidate power within the administrative state.
Exactly. And it's important to understand what the administrative state actually is. It's essentially the unelected bureaucracy that makes a lot of the decisions in government. So Duke is suggesting that Musk, like those who pushed for a Secretary of General Affairs over a century ago, might be aiming to increase control through seemingly efficient structures.
But how does Dogecoin factor into this? That cryptocurrency that started as a joke.
Yeah. Duke sees Dogecoin as like a prime example of how financial markets can be manipulated. Remember how its value just skyrocketed, largely due to Elon Musk's tweets? Duke calls it a classic pump and dump scheme, basically inflating the price artificially and then selling off when it's high, leaving a lot of average investors, holding the bag.
It definitely makes you think twice about the power of social media and how easily people can be swayed. But let's get back to that symbol Duke keeps talking about. The Phrygian cap.
Yeah, this is where it gets really interesting. Duke takes us on this historical journey, showing how this cap, which was often worn by freed slaves in ancient Rome, symbolized the liberty granted by the state, not inherent freedom. It's a subtle but crucial distinction.
So it's almost like a permission slip for freedom granted by those who still hold the real power. And this pattern, according to Duke, repeats itself throughout history.
Right. He points to its presence in ancient Roman mystery cults, like Mithraism, which had ties to power structures of its time. And then there's its prominent role in both the French and American revolutions. Raises questions about who was truly in control during these upheavals.
It's like he's suggesting that even revolutions can be co-opted and manipulated to serve the interests of the elite.
That's exactly his point. And to make it even more unsettling, he shows how the Phrygian cap is still being used today. It's found on the logos and symbols of institutions like the U.S. Senate, various U.S. states, and even countries like El Salvador and Cuba. It's this subtle nod to this long history of controlled freedom.
This is giving me chills. It's like we're seeing a hidden language of power that's been operating for centuries right under our noses. But how exactly do they pull this off? How do they control the narrative so effectively?
Duke calls it epistemological warfare, the manipulation of language and knowledge to control populations. He argues that words like logos and liberty have been deliberately twisted over time to obscure their true meanings.
So it's like they're hijacking the very words we use to think about freedom and truth.
Precisely. And Duke gives a fascinating example from his own life. Remember how the media tried to label him alt-right just because he'd photographed certain figures? That's a classic example of what he calls the if-then-equals-because pattern.
Wait, break that down for me. How does that pattern work?
Okay, so it's a way of creating this false cause and effect relationship. In Duke's case, the logic was, if he photographed these people, then he must agree with their views, therefore he's alt-right. But taking a picture of someone doesn't automatically mean you endorse their beliefs, right? It's a way of shutting down critical thinking and forcing people into these predefined boxes.
That's a really insidious tactic. It's like they're trying to control the narrative by controlling the very language we use to describe it.
Exactly. And Duke argues that this kind of linguistic manipulation is happening all around us, shaping our perceptions of reality without us even realizing it. He calls it signature reduction, an attempt to discredit someone by associating them with these negative labels.
So it's like a smear campaign designed to make people dismiss someone's ideas before they even have a chance to hear them.
Exactly. And there's a flip side to this too, which Duke calls signature increase, boosting someone's public perception to make them seem more influential or important than they actually are.
It's all about manipulating perception,
Mm,
whether it's tearing someone down or building them up.
precisely. And Duke believes that these tactics are often used to prop up those who are serving the interests of the powerful while silencing those who challenge the status quo.
This is all starting to feel very Orwellian. But what about the role of money and finance in all of this?
Yeah, well, Duke is very critical of what he calls the usurious debt-based economic system, essentially the way that debt is used to control people and nations.
So we're talking about things like predatory lending and the accumulation of massive amounts of debt.
Exactly. And Duke sees the Federal Reserve, which controls the U.S. money supply, as a key player in this system. He argues that it's designed to benefit a small elite at the expense of everyone else.
He's not just talking about auditing the Fed, is he?
No, he wants to get rid of it entirely. He believes that we need a more equitable and just financial system that doesn't rely on debt as like a tool of control.
That's a pretty radical idea. But how does all of this connect back to Elon Musk and the Doge?
Duke argues that Musk is a made man, someone who's been elevated to a position of power and influence by those who control the system. He compares them to other tech giants like Jeff Bezos and Mark Zuckerberg, suggesting that their success stories are carefully crafted narratives designed to legitimize their power.
So we're talking about a system of manufactured consent, where even those who appear to be challenging the status quo are actually playing their assigned roles.
That's the unsettling implication. Duke believes that this system relies heavily on epistemological warfare, controlling the flow of information and manipulating language to shape how we think and what we believe.
He even suggests that the conflict in Ukraine and the talk of a looming World War III might be part of this manipulation, a way to distract us from the real issues and keep us divided.
Right. He's skeptical of the mainstream narrative and believes that there are these powerful forces who benefit from conflict and chaos. He even questions the existence of thermonuclear weapons, pointing out that much of the technology used to develop them was actually provided to Russia by the United States and NATO.
That's a pretty mind-blowing claim.
It is, but he backs it up with historical facts. He argues that these supposed enemies often collaborate behind the scenes, manipulating events to serve their own interests.
So what about the Great Reset agenda that's been getting so much attention lately? What's Duke's take on that?
He's deeply skeptical of it, particularly the push for a cashless society and central bank digital currencies, or CBDCs.
He's seen firsthand how platforms like PayPal and Stripe have been used to censor and deplatform people who challenge the mainstream narrative.
Exactly. And he's concerned that CBDCs will give governments even more control over our financial lives, allowing them to track and control our spending, freeze our assets, and even punish us for expressing dissenting views.
It's like a dystopian nightmare come to life.
Duke even speculates that the entire global financial system is rigged to favor the interests of a small elite. He shares this fascinating story about a mathematician who discovered a backdoor in public key encryption, the technology that underpins much of our online security.
So if this backdoor exists, it means that intelligence agencies could potentially access all of our digital communications, emails, texts, financial transactions, everything.
That's the terrifying implication.
It's enough to make you want to ditch your smartphone and go live off the grid. But seriously, is there any hope? What can we do in the face of such overwhelming power?
Duke believes there is hope. He argues that one of the most powerful tools we have is active listening.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What exactly does that involve? It sounds more engaged than just passively hearing things.
Yeah, it's about approaching information with a critical ear, not just taking it at face value. Pay attention to the language being used, the logic, the assumptions. Are there inconsistencies, missing pieces? It's about being an active participant in creating meaning from what you hear, not just a sponge soaking it up.
So instead of just accepting what's presented, you're digging deeper, asking questions.
Exactly. Challenge the information, look for evidence, demand clarity. Duke even gives us this handy tool for dissecting manipulative language, the if then equals because construction we talked about earlier.
Right, the example of Duke being labeled alt-right just because he took certain photographs. That really highlights how easily that pattern can be misused.
Yeah, it's a way of creating a false cause and effect relationship to manipulate how we think. By recognizing this pattern, we can start seeing through the smoke and mirrors of propaganda. It's like a key that unlocks this whole new level of understanding.
It's empowering to realize we have the tools to deconstruct these narratives, but it also seems like a lot of work to constantly be questioning everything.
It is. But Duke reminds us that we don't have to do it alone. He emphasizes the importance of community, connecting with others who are also seeking truth and questioning the dominant narrative.
There's strength in numbers. Sharing information, supporting each other, it makes the task less daunting.
Yeah, and Duke even talks about the power of humor and satire as weapons against those in power. Sometimes laughter is the best way to expose hypocrisy and absurdity.
So it's not all doom and gloom. There's room for joy and connection, even while we're resisting these powerful forces.
Absolutely. Duke's message is ultimately one of hope. He believes that even though the challenges are immense, we're not powerless. We have the power to think for ourselves, to connect with each other, and to create a more just world.
It's a powerful message, a call to action. But I have to admit, it's a lot to process. This deep dive into Duke's work has been eye-opening, to say the least.
He throws down a gauntlet, doesn't he? But I think the key takeaway is this: awareness is the first step. Once we start to see the patterns, the manipulation, the hidden language of power, we can start to resist it, and we can do it together.
Well, folks, that's our deep dive into the mind of Peter Duke. Covered a lot of ground, from Elon Musk and the Doge of Venice to the symbolism of the Phrygian cap and the insidious nature of epistemological warfare. It's a lot to digest, but I hope you found it as thought-provoking as we did.
What stands out to you from this conversation? What resonated most? More importantly, how will you apply Duke's insights to your own life? What actions will you take to reclaim your individual sovereignty in an age of information manipulation? These are the questions I hope you'll continue to explore long after this deep dive is over.